As it was explained to me by Mazda, there are two very specific markets for SUVs in Australia. And that's for 2 rows of seats and 3 rows of seats. If you need a big car with 3 rows of seats, you're really well catered for by the CX-8 and the CX-9. If, on the other hand, you only need 2 rows of seats, the range tops out with a CX-5 at about $56,000. Now, a lot of people have a little bit more than $56,000 to spend on an SUV, and Mazda had a bit of a problem there, and that's where this car fits in. It'll cater for people who had traditionally migrated to cars like an Audi Q5, like a BMW X3 or a Mercedes-Benz GLC. But when you start adding the options to those cars to bring that up to the spec of this car, you're often looking at a 6-figure sum. So if Mazda could parachute a car in at $80,000, $90,000, they could be onto something. Let's take this one for a drive and have a look.
At this point, I should perhaps just manage your expectations a little. Much has been made of Mazda engineering the CX-60 for a pair of longitudinal, mild hybrid 6-cylinder engines that will drive either all 4 or just the rear wheels. There'll be a 3-litre petrol and a very clever 3.3-litre diesel. Well, unfortunately, we're not going to see those power plants anytime before 2023. But in the meantime, we have something equally interesting: the CX-60 2.5-litre plug-in hybrid. Numbers? Well, when you combine the electric motor and the internal combustion engine, you've got 241 kilowatts and 500 newton meters, which is enough to scuttle it to 100 kilometers an hour in just 5.8 seconds. An 8-speed automatic gearbox with, get this, no torque converter also debuts. This uses a multi-plate wet clutch and claims to offer a more direct feel than a typical slush box. We'll see how that fares later. Mazda reckons the CX-60 PHEV will go around 63 kilometres on a charge, which will be enough to cover the average commute of most Aussie motorists. Even if you do run out of juice, the petrol engine seamlessly chimes back in. What's more, the 17.8 kilowatt hour battery isn't like the huge units you get in a full EV. You could happily plug this into a plug socket at home, and at around 3 kilowatts per hour, it'll charge to full in 6 hours overnight, although you can cut the time markedly by using a wall box. Single phase 7 kilowatt charging will take around 2.5 hours, and 22 kilowatt 3-phase will cut that to a brisk 45 minutes or so. Anyway, let's take it for a quick drive and see how it shapes up.
Normally when a manufacturer launches a car, it'll launch maybe a new platform, 1 or 2 new engines that are often iterations of previous engines, but Mazda has absolutely thrown the kitchen sink at this CX-60. Not only is it on a new platform, but it's got this whole new plug-in hybrid system. It's got a brand new 8-speed transmission that features no torque converter whatsoever, and there's a new front suspension system. It's double wishbone, whereas everything else was on struts pretty much. So there's a lot to take in. The ride quality on this car, just upon initial impression, is a little firmer than I expected. It's well controlled, and Mazda have fitted kinematic posture control, which we've seen on the MX-5. And when you turn the car hard into a corner, it just nips at that inside back wheel to try and pull it down and reduce body roll. It works pretty well. I'd have to question, though, the effect on brake pad wear if you're routinely driving the car on a twisty road, but you know, that's not this car's typical use case. It's deceptively big. I like the proportions of it. I like this long bonnet that speaks of rear-wheel drive, and we will be getting those rear-wheel drive engines in due course. It just seems absolutely bizarre that in this day and age, when everything like this vehicle is being electrified, that Mazda is pouring resource into new combustion engine technology. So in a year or so, we're going to get the 3-litre straight-six petrol engine that will drive the rear wheels or all-wheel drive. That's yet to be decided whether those layouts will come to this market. And there will also be a 3.3-litre diesel, again with the choice of rear drive or all-wheel drive. And who else is doing that? The steering on this car is typically quiet, accurate,
not a whole lot of feel. It weights up quite nicely. I do like the weighting of the steering, and the car does shrink around you. CX-60 feels quite agile in corners, which is good because it's a big unit. In terms of overall length, it's longer than, say, an Audi Q5, a BMW X3, or a Mercedes GLC. And only the GLC of those three has a longer wheelbase. The vehicle overall is around 20 centimetres longer than a CX-5 if you're looking for that kind of perspective. The electric motor system on this car is absolutely intriguing. It can drive both front and rear wheels. Normally in a car like this, the internal combustion engine drives the back wheels and the electric motor drives the front wheels, and there'll be diff or clutch pack or something to sort out what each axle is doing. But this one, it's a lot more sophisticated. And I was sitting down with some of the Mazda people last night, and they kind of blew my mind by saying that the electric motor also drives the gearbox. So you can select gears in the electric motor, not all of the 8 gears that are available, but a subset of those, which is really interesting. The electric range on this is quoted at 63 kilometres, up to a maximum speed of 100 kilometres an hour. And from what I've seen, it's entirely credible. And in the hybrid mode that I've been largely driving the car around in, I've driven it out of Lisbon and up to the coast here, and it has actually averaged, and I still don't quite believe this, 1.0 litres per 100 kilometres, and that's with the internal combustion engine running. So yeah, the economy of this car is really, really good, and given that most Australians will typically commute around 32 kilometres a day, they'll be able to do that entirely on electric power. That's pretty cool, I think. Mazda has fitted the MI drive mode controller, and that cycles the car through sport, normal, EV and off-road, and there is also a towing mode you can access. Brake towing for this vehicle is quoted at 2,500 kilos. Just set that into sport, we'll accelerate it up the road. Yeah, that definitely sounds like a 4-cylinder, but it has some go. Let's, a bit of understeer there, but it's a horrible wet day. Gonna give the battery a good rinsing here, but yeah, it's got some go. Mazda's quoting that 5.8 second 0 to 100 time. Yeah, I can believe that. They're also saying it's the most powerful vehicle they've ever built, and yeah, it can hustle, this thing. These roads here in Portugal are pretty good. When you come out of town, they're very, very smooth. In town, they can be quite horrific, but you still hear a bit of the bump thump into the cabin, those noise pathways. And I just have to wonder what that car will be like on a typical Australian road, this CX-60. It might need local suspension tuning, but these are pre-production vehicles. And they have, switch that back into normal, a couple of little rough edges. You hear some strange transmission whine, especially near idle, and they've already cancelled that out with the newest batch of cars that Australia's going to receive. And they'll be better still when we do get them. And there's still no word on pricing, which is quite key. Pricing and specs for the Australian market have yet to be decided, but it looks likely that Australians will, as usual, migrate to some of the higher end models in the range, and I can understand that. But these cars are super well equipped. There's very little in terms of extras that you want to put on, and it comes with all the safety gear you'd expect: blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, adaptive cruise control with speed sign recognition. Yeah, it's pretty well kitted out. The all-wheel drive system in this car in its default mode is quite intriguing. It is very rear biased, but there is no scenario you'll have read a lot of things about this being a rear-wheel drive platform, but in this PHEV there is no scenario where 100% of drive goes to the back. It's always defaulting some to the front. And it also saves some residual power in the battery. Even when the battery is showing that it's depleted, it'll always have something there for overtakes or sharp demands of throttle. Another thing that Mazda has done pretty well is calibrate the regenerative braking system. Sometimes as you come into a corner and apply the brakes, it's the electric motor that's slowing you down, and at other times it's the traditional friction brakes. And on some cars, that switch can feel a little bit odd, a little bit unnatural. But in the CX-60, I think they've done a pretty good fist of getting that right. There hasn't been an occasion today where I've thought, the brake pedal's not reacting as I'd want it to react. It's pretty faithful. One of the features that I really like, you know, I'm quite a big guy, my partner she's really small, is the camera-based driver personalization system. So you enter your details into it, get your driving position set up, and it can store up to 250 parameters. And you just get in, the camera recognizes your face like it does on your iPhone, and it sets everything up for you in your predetermined position. You don't even have to press any buttons. It's really cool, and you can have a number of profiles. Yeah, that's a really, really neat trick, and I'm surprised no one's been onto that before, but kudos to Mazda. You know, you might look at the headline power and performance figures of this car, CX-60 PHEV, and think, well, you know, that could be an alternative to one of the German more sporty SUVs. And, you know, as long as you don't ask too much of it, it does, yeah, it does deliver a really quite crisp drive. But yeah, if you're really, really driving the car hard, there's 1,995 kilograms of bulk that you're dealing with, and it's not really on the sportiest tyre. So on a really give and take road, if you're a keen driver, those German cars will deliver a bit more. But you know, if you're just looking to take the long way home from the school run drop off, then yeah, there's a lot to be said for this one.
The CX-60's cabin is a very agreeable place to be, and as part of Mazda's push-up market, it frankly needs to be. Materials choice reflect the company's focus on its crafted in Japan tagline, and are at least the equal of anything in the same price bracket. There's ample room for one 6-footer to sit behind another, although the transmission tunnel does create a slight bump for the middle occupant of the second row. Headroom is excellent front and rear, even if you fit the glass sunroof. The CX-60 naturally feels airier and more comfortable than a CX-5. The centre armrest has been extended and widened, while the commander control dial that you use to operate the infotainment has been moved forward by 132mm to sit in a more natural position. There's also 44mm more front shoulder width and 50mm more in the rear than the CX-5. Even the pedal box is more spacious, thanks to ditching the torque converter for that more compact clutch pack. Fling the hatch open at the back and you'll get 470 litres of space with the seats in place, and another 100 litres of underfloor storage in some models. But it's worth noting that this PHEV model that we've driven had a puncture repair kit and compressor in the space below the boot floor. The available space extends to a hefty 1,726 litres if you drop the 40-20-40 split rear seats and load the CX-60 to the ceiling. As first tasters go, the Mazda CX-60 certainly has us intrigued. There's a lot to get into with this car, and it is a pre-production version, so final specifications and pricing for Australia are clearly going to be key in how this car is received by the market. But first impressions? Colour us impressed.